Yeah. Just. Yeah, I know, but it's unfortunate. So,
Angela,
especially
I'm gonna read
since
this.
you participate in
Take
everything. I mean, we don't have any decision authority. It makes an exception from. I'm not.
I can take a quick look, but that's not my understanding.
Okay, folks, we're gonna be going live in a second.
I think it says other than truly advised.
There he is.
There he is.
Actually, it ran up and I'm out of breath. Hello, everybody.
Good, how are you?
Holidays to all.
Happy holidays to you. Okay, it's welcome.
That's right, you don't have to. I'm battling the sinus.
Oh, the worst.
But
Don't piss me.
I'm not. I'm taking antibiotics. I knew it was important to be here for a vote. So.
Keep your distance too from Tom. He's been leaning a little closer now to Councilman.
That's what viruses do to children, is they make them more affectionate. I'm pretty
All set?
confident.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councilwoman Joanne Ryan. Welcome to the Special Commission for Taxation and Revenue regular meeting. It is Wednesday, December 27th. It is 5:01 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you kindly read the roll?
Chairwoman Ryan.
Present.
Vice Chairman DeVies is on Zoom, but not present. Councilman Espinal.
Present.
Councilor Angelou. Present. Commissioner Mancini.
Present.
Commissioner Conrad Wells.
Present.
Commissioner Driver is absent. Commissioner Sergos.
Seguros, yes, here I am.
Commissioner Stolzman.
Present.
We have 7 present and 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I just wanted to illuminate that, as the clerk just stated, our vice chair is not able to be physically with us, and due to time constraints, I said absolutely he could participate in the meeting via Zoom, because it's important to have his dialogue. He's been an important, he's played an important role in this committee. He will not be able to vote, however. Okay, so with that caveat, I just wanted to explain his presence. I also would like to recognize our fantastic tax assessor, Jamie Muscatelli, is with us. And we have our other fantastic solicitor, Lisa Freeze. Thank you for being here with us. And I see Michael Politano from the mayor's office. Thank you for being with us. Okay, with that, I'd like to ask the clerk to distribute, well, first, let's read 2 items. May I have a motion to take items 1 and 2 together? Moved by Councilwoman Angelou, seconded by Councilman Espinal. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. We're going to combine 1 and 2. Madam Clerk, could you kindly read 1 and 2 into the record?
1, broad discussion of city's tax and revenue structure. 2, approval of final recommendations.
Okay. With that, I would like to ask the clerk, Madam Clerk, could you kindly distribute a final recommendation report to each committee member? And I just informed you folks beforehand that I distributed prior to the meeting a copy of the final report to our vice chair, Michael DeVies. Vice Chair, do you have the report? Can you confirm that you have the final report?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so everybody here has the final report at this juncture. Okay. Before I begin, I would like to thank the clerks first and foremost. This has been a very short period of time and a lot of work, a lot of appendices that have been received and filed, a lot of guest attendees. And for all your hard work, you probably worked harder than anybody on this committee, and I want to personally thank you for that effort. I'd also like to thank our auditor, who is not here, Gina Costa, who has spent hours upon hours reviewing a lot of financial data, verifying it and doubling down on numbers and so forth. And her effort was remarkable. I'd also like to thank our tax assessor, Janice Muscatelli, who spent time with Gina and myself, again, countless hours working through the math and some of these recommendations that are before us, as well as the department heads who responded to questions posed through our auditor and through our tax assessor, so we could get a report completed. And last, but certainly most important, I want to thank the commission members who gave up their time, participated in these meetings. It's a tough time of year for a commission to meet, and it was equally complicated by the short period of time that we had to kick out a very, very important report for the city of Providence. So with that, I'd like to say thank you personally. This is a good body of work. I've had a number of conversations with many people who have participated in the meetings, as well as listened to our discussions, and wholeheartedly believe that we delve very deeply into all of the components of our tax structure. And as you can see, we're probably going to have a very, very important body of work to show. What I'd like to do now is basically go through this report. And I'm going to read it. Usually I ask the clerks to read, but I'm going to read it. And I'm going to go through the recommendations, because that's pretty much what we want to really delve into. The structure of the report is, an introduction that is pretty much our charge, the recommendations, and then followed by the appendix, which is a listing of all of our meetings, and a hot link to all of the content that was derived from the meetings. In order to prepare this report, I relied upon the efforts of our auditor, our tax assessor, department heads, and I listened to the tapes from all of our meetings. I reviewed notes, had conversations with some commission members. I quite honestly believe this is a solid body of work. With that, I'd like to just delve right in. The introduction: by way of background, the Providence City Council passed Resolution 42-285, establishing a special commission for taxation and revenue on September 7, 2023, and charged with developing a more equitable and fair tax structure for the people of Providence. Specifically, the commission was empowered and directed to conduct a comprehensive review of state tax and enabling law, the city of Providence revenue streams from all sources, the city's taxing and levying structure, engage in a robust review of national best practices, and to make recommendations regarding appropriate changes to the tax policy and state law, including but not limited to the study and analysis of the overall reval process, commercial tax rate, residential tax rate, and exemptions, all with the goal of furthering a more equitable and just levying of taxes upon the people of Providence. The commission was also asked to review all revenue streams and to consider alternative options that diversify city income so as to reduce the burden on property owners. Understanding the timing of the city's fiscal year, the critical nature of the task, commission members were asked to produce their findings within 128 days from the date of their appointment, namely December 31st, 2023. This report contains the findings and recommendations of the commission. So again, the date we have is steadfast December 31st. So it is intended that we can pass recommendations with all of our agreements And the report will be submitted to the council, and it will go through the appropriate vetting process in the council. The membership, no surprise, but I'm reading it into the record. The special commission consists of 9 members appointed by Providence City Council President, Chair Joanne Ryan, Councilwoman Ward 5, Vice Chair Michael DeBiase, Sue R. Endeavour, Councilor Ward 3, Pedro J. Espinal, Councilman Ward 7, Lawrence J. Mancini, Chief Financial Officer, Tom Saboris, Sharon Conant Wells, Jane Driver, Robert I. Stoltzman, Esquire. Ooh, there's a spelling issue on Esquire. Clerks Angela Harris, and Yuli Polanco. I will fix that typo. Can everyone just take a moment to look at the presentation of their names and to confirm that that is the appropriate spelling? And presentation. I said 7, but it says Ward 10 in the report.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how 7 popped up. Thank you, Pedro Espinal is councilman from Ward 10, and he does a fine job.
For Ward 7.
I will make that correction. Okay, so that is the introduction. The members, the attendance is what it is. I want to thank the clerks for making that available and the council policy office for pulling that all together. The recommendations are, I'm just going to read, I'm going to highlight all of them, and then I'm going to go one by one, and we're going to have discussion. That's okay. So the special commission met regularly over the course of 4 months and invited experts and industry professionals to present on a variety of topics and made the following recommendation. The meeting dates, topics, and minutes are detailed in the appendix. So on the first recommendation in this packet here is to return to an owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied residential tax rate. To advocate for enabling state legislation that would allow the city to create additional categories of real property with corresponding taxing mechanisms. Add a consumption-based tax to reduce the city's reliance on property tax and properly acknowledge that city services utilized by individuals who visit and work in Providence but are not residents. Expand exemptions for vulnerable populations. Return vacant and underutilized properties to productive use. Increase tax designation, classification, certification efforts. That's a lot of shuns. Continue efforts to monetize the court, fee and fine oversight, plan for a reduction in commercial tax to improve Providence's competitiveness and attract new commercial business, request changes to state pilot tax structure, and that's all of them. So let's now delve into, and again, I gleaned these from our reviewing notes and our discussions in the minutes. So return to an owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied residential tax rate. The current practice of lowering the residential tax rate using a homestead exemption makes it difficult for potential new residents contemplating buying property in the city to understand how their taxes would compare to other municipalities. Providence is currently ranked 14th highest as compared to other cities and towns. Once you consider the effective rate, which takes into account the homestead, Providence is actually 32nd in the state. A bifurcated rate, that is one rate for owner-occupied and one rate for non-owner-occupied, which the city has utilized in the past, would create owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied rates for residential properties. This clarity would assist in bringing transparency to the taxing rules of the city. An amendment GL 44-5-11.8B1II is required to enable Providence to return to the structure which would use the non-owner-occupied rate as a comparison point to the commercial tax rate going forward. A similar amendment was enacted in 2021 as it relates to the implementation of the homestead exemption. Everybody get that?
I understand.
Could you, answer the question?
Hold on, everybody Everybody got that? Okay. Commissioner Sagoras, you have your hand up.
I understand that, but this is, I mean, this may be a less confusing thing in some respect, but mathematically, it's no different from the homestead exemption. So I'm not sure that this constitutes any kind of change that would actually change the revenue.
It actually does. We've worked,
See what way-
it allows, the intent and the purpose for this commission was to come up with a tax structure that was, provided clarity, fairness, and was predictable. The return to the non-owner occupied, owner-occupied, taxing structure basically is, transparent. And in doing so, there's a component of this, which I probably should read the second piece into the record as well, because it kind of goes hand in hand. But it is, we tested it with the assessor's office, we tested it through Gina. There's a number of components to this recommendation that make that feasible and doable. And we were able to get back to testing it against last year's levy with, different classifications of property. So let me just hold your thought for 1 second. Let me read the next component into the record. Advocate for enabling state legislation that would allow the city to create additional categories of real property with corresponding taxing mechanisms, consistent with other municipalities, for example, West Warwick. By way of illustration, amending the city's state taxing laws would allow the city to develop new real property tax proposals within the city budget to tax small apartment buildings differently from larger ones, or short-term rentals at a more appropriate rate. Specific proposals for new tax rates could be considered as part of the city's budget process. These possible legislative changes would permit the administration and council to work together to weigh different options and possibilities. The city could pursue the creation of the following new categories through this mechanism. Again, all apartment buildings for all apartment buildings, or for smaller 6 to 10 commercial buildings would be a category. Apply to residential properties of up to 10 units, depending on fiscal constraints. Short-term rental properties apply to properties that are used for commercial short-term rentals. So basically, following the West Warwick model of classifications of properties helps us in a more clearer way classify a property, tax an apple as an apple, tax an orange as an orange. Commissioner Mancini, do you want to opine on that to help us with clarity? Because I know I worked with the finance department to see if we could generate a model that was clear and transparent, as opposed to backing into our rates through a forced homestead percentage.
Yes, I'm happy to do so, Madam Chair. Thank you. Excuse me, I had a moment of sore throat, but
Do you have water?
I do. Let me just preface that by saying that through the entirety of these commission meetings, and being the only administration appointee, and I value that, and I appreciate the recommendation of the council president to appoint me. When these meetings conclude each week, I regularly meet with the finance team, particularly the assessor's office, and we share knowledge from these meetings, and we share with the council internal order as well. So throughout these proceedings, I have said that the administration has embraced the notion that if we can find a fairer and more equitable tax policy where we could ease burden, in some cases it may shift burden, but designed to ease burden, that we would support that, and we have supported that. But I have also said that while that decision can be made based on these recommendations, it would all come down to really being when we're in the throes of it, when we're preparing budgets. And so the budget would dictate what relief, if any, is available, by what means and what methods that we would recommend. Having this as a tool in order to do so is clearly a good move. The assessor's office has worked regularly, as you said, with the internal audit, looking at various models. Each of those models, while they are not perfect, they show that we could get as close to revenue neutral as we think we could. And when I say revenue neutral, for the record, I mean that revenue that we see today that comes from taxation. It may be it may be that it cannot be revenue neutral from taxation, but it can be revenue offset by other new revenue streams that may come from either additional state assistance or some new revenue that we've identified during the course of the budget process. So we are clearly open-minded, but we're clearly embracing that. We would pursue this legislation on behalf of this commission's recommendation. I think we have the opportunity in the General Assembly to present a good foot forward. I think that'll work with us, and as a voting member of this commission, I fully support that.
Vice Chair DeBiase, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I think Tom's point is that without more, we're not sure what the revenue impact will be. I mean, what these are structural changes that set the stage for actual numbers and tax rates to be put against them at some later date when putting the budget together.
That is true.
That's true.
Commissioner Severs?
I'm still not, I mean, if you have an owner occupied rate and a non-owner occupied rate, and one is 80% of the other, right? One is 20% lower than the other. I don't think I understand why that's different from just having a 20% homestead exemption. Is there a structural difference to that, or are we just relabeling what we already do?
I would defer to the assessor, but I do think that the answer is really, when we look at a bifurcated rate, it's for clarity. It's to give,
Sure.
I use the expression buyer beware. So for new buyers, new investors, that they understand how this process works without having to go through the complication of doing a calculation that's affected by a homestead. And perhaps over time, a homestead may or may not be implemented in some other fashion. And I think that may be one of your recommendations
It is further on.
as we further on. So I think it was designed to be mostly for clarity, mostly, and I would hope that it would mean fairness and more equitable distribution by every class of property as well.
Okay, Councilman Anfield.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I have a question about the last line in the first one, where it says, the amendment is required to make the Providence return to this tax structure, blah, 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 blah. As the comparison point to the commercial tax rate going forward, is there going to be is that saying that there's going to be some sort of set ratio or something, or is it just that we're comparing it?
So there's always kind of been a rule that was presented to us at budget time. And again, our budget time is like, 8 weeks between the time that the mayor drops a budget and we've got to have it out there. So this commission gave us an opportunity to expand the dialogue and have a good, healthy conversation. Give us time to lobby the legislature for a new tax model that is fair and transparent and progressive. So when we were looking at all the legislation, the historical legislation, we found this statute that basically enabled Providence to return, to use a non-owner occupied rate as a comparison point to commercial tax rate. We've used in the past the single family rate, not the non-owner occupied. There is ability to change that base. And when we're doing the math on calculating the single family rate, it's always been a component of the commercial tax. And they've always fought with each other through you understand what I'm saying, through the budget process. So there is flexibility. It's been done before. There's precedent for it. I had a conversation with Vice Chair as well. I think there's leeway there, and we need to ask the General Assembly for that leeway and that permission so that we can change the math, because the multiplication quotient hurts us when we're trying to set our rates. And it basically results in an unfair application of rates across the board, because we're constantly, that's why we use the homestead, or the council will use the homestead as a percentage to try to provide relief. And again, the whole concept is truth in taxation, as opposed to setting rates that are unrealistic based on these calculations, and then forcing the prices down so people can afford to stay in their homes. All right, with that, I'd like to continue unless the vice chair wants to say anything else before I continue on. Okay.
I'm all set, thank you.
Commissioner Wells.
I just want to be clear in terms of verbiage,
Yes.
because it says all apartment buildings, and it comes to mind that we have tax stabilization, but we also have low-income housing tax credits and HUD, which are all in the different tax structures and have all kinds of agreements. I would just want to make sure that those don't get moved into the.
Those
term
agreements would
all.
stay in place. Commissioner Mancini, can you affirm that?
I would defer to the solicitor, to the assessor.
It would say in place.
Okay.
Just
Thank you.
Is this structure sentence proper though? Because the intention is all apartment buildings or for smaller 6 to 10 unit commercial buildings. So the point is, we currently have owner occupied, non-owner occupied 1 to 5 family. And then we have a number of residential properties in units that are above 6. There's an interest and fairness to provide relief in a classified tax rate to all apartment buildings. In other words, if there's residential people living in an apartment. Or if we can't fiscally do that, if it's not fiscally sound, we would limit it to 6 to 10 units and give them a special, a reduced rate. So it wouldn't be the full commercial rate, it'd be somewhere in between the commercial rate and the non-owner occupied rate. So that's kind of what that is intended to say there. Does that say it? Are you good with that, Vice Chair?
Madam Chair,
I think I got a delay on the Vice Chair. Let me just finish, so,
yes,
and then we'll weigh in. Short-term vacation rentals is also, should have a classification. Again, apply tax to properties that are used for commercial short-term rental uses. There's a lot of, when we were looking at the tax levy, there are a lot of properties that are getting taxed at a single family rate that are commercial in that they're short-term rentals. And they were purchased for short-term rentals, but they're being taxed at a single family rate. That's wrong, that's unfair. There's a lot of revenue that we're losing there. And we feel, I feel that it would make sense based on the work that I've done with the assessor and the auditor to create a special classification for that group. So again, special tax rate for all residential apartment. Anybody who's a renter in apartments, you own that building, the landlord should have a special rate. It's different from if you're renting to people and you have a large commercial structure, investment structure, versus a commercial property that's a restaurant or a business or whatever. They should have different rates. And that will apply some relief to our renters. Vice Chair, do you want to weigh in on that classification? I know you feel strongly about it.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the things I thought was most important, was to have a differential rate for apartment buildings that's different from commercial. Of course, it's, you know, it's the devil's going to be in the tax rate differential and whether there's actual, but that's for the council and the mayor to deal with. But to have the ability to do it, I think is important.
I agree, and that's why it's here. Commissioner Soror.
Is there a mechanism for identifying the short-term rentals? I mean, the state has the registry. Is that how we,
I agree that it's a challenge that we need to address. We need to build a better mousetrap. There is an ordinance that requires if you have a Airbnb or a short-term rental to register. Is it effective as it should be? Probably not. Could we do a better job of it? Yes. Should we do a better job of it? Yes. And that's, again, more recommendations. Everything's kind of linked together here. And that gets back to what Commissioner Mancini said. We've got to do a better job of identifying these different classifications, holding people to the classifications. If it's, somebody is living in California, I've had a number of conversations, and Commissioner Driver was pretty adamant and articulate about her concerns about people getting a non-owner occupied, an owner occupied rate, and it's a non-owner occupied property. We have to do a better job of certifying the different classifications of property, and in doing so, in creating these additional levels of taxation, we'll be able to yield the revenue that gives the relief to the people that deserve it the most. And that's where I keep saying it's really a tax fairness and taxation model. But let me continue, and then we can have more discussion.
Madam Chair, I hate
Yes,
to
I'm
interrupt you,
sorry.
but I do think you started this as part of the discussion on the grammar and
Yep.
clarity.
Yep.
And if I may suggest, I think it's not clear that the first bullet point under this second recommendation is intended to include the larger apartment buildings, which is where so much of the rent burden is
Yes.
placed on tenants.
What would be a better
So
way of
I
phrasing
might
that?
suggest say all apartment buildings and then just dash depending on fiscal constraints, because the council will assess whether the 3 to 5 and the 5 to 10. So I think it gets confusing by carving out the 6 to 10. I'm not wed to any specific language, but I think you want to make it clear that all apartment buildings will be considered.
I think that's a better grammatic. I think that is what the intention of that was. You're good with that? Solicitor Freeze.
Thank you, Chair. I was just gonna make another alternative suggestion to just do all apartment buildings or the alternative, smaller 6 to 10 unit. If you wanted to make it clear that these are independent thoughts.
Well, but it could be both, right? The council may, I'm sorry for not trying to mean to.
Please, Commissioner.
It could be a rate for smaller number of units and a rate for the larger number of units. And the council may want to do both with the legislation. So that's why I'm worried about in the
Or
alternative.
if you just do,
That's,
you could actually just not tie a particular number. You could say, well, an alternative unit-based
right.
apartment structure.
So all apartments. And that's why I say all apartment buildings dash, depending on fiscal constraints, which you have at the end of that. I think that includes.
I'm okay with that, Ed. I think it's a good one. Anybody else have any comment on that? Okay, because I think that gets to what we're hoping to
Yeah,
achieve.
and yeah, just for the record, the reason for that is all of our apartment structures suffer from varying tax structures. So if we simplify it and say we have residential, owner occupied, non-owner occupied rates, and then we have apartment rates that are perhaps different. That's why, and the council will figure that out. It would be easier for somebody trying to either purchase, invest, or set their rents, knowing that this is the rate going forward.
I'm fine. I think that sticks with what the discussion at this table and testimony alluded to. Okay, let's continue on, and then what we'll do at the end is we'll accept all these amendments and get a final piece. Okay, add a consumption-based tax. We talked a lot about that, to reduce the city's reliance on property tax and properly acknowledge the city services utilized by individuals who visit and work in the province but are not residents. The commission is recommending an admissions tax. We talked about that. That would add an incremental cost to tickets sold for events in the city, like PPAC, like the Civic Center. Additionally, a parking tax should be considered as an opportunity to bring additional revenues to the city. An analysis previously completed can be used as a starting point for further analysis related to this proposal. And if you recall the NRN, the gentleman who came in and testified on that, there was a body of work and study on that, we just need to continue that. And again, it's not this commission's charge, it's the work of the administration, working with the council, through the finance committee, to continue on that, with that work. Expand exemptions for vulnerable populations, recognizing that increased property values have significantly affected certain populations. As a matter of public policy, it is in the best interest of the city to support our vulnerable residents and to assist them with staying in their homes. The city should expand the use of key exemptions, especially in years when revale occurs, to smooth the impacts or increase values on those who need it the most. Exemptions are an appropriate tool to accomplish this goal, as they don't artificially suppress property assessments, and they provide genuine financial relief to targeted homeowners. Means testing should be relied upon here to be sure that exemptions are being realized effectively and fairly. Commissioner Sabers.
Which populations are we talking about?
Vulnerable populations, seniors, all of our exemption categories.
And are we talking about specifically for homeowners?
We are talking about our residents that are homeowners, yes.
There was a substantial body of testimony from the Apartment Association and from other people about the effect of the homestead exemption on tenants, on renters, and how the large discounts that we offer homeowners winds up pushing up rents. So far, I don't actually see any of those concerns addressed here.
Actually, I think we do address them in restructuring the bifurcated rate with added revenues. And this piece of it is an exemption to fairly provide relief to vulnerable populations, seniors, people on fixed incomes, people who are disabled.
There aren't any.
Hold on a second.
Okay, so
I'm trying to answer your question, sir. I think the means testing also is a fairness component to it. But relief is provided across the board, especially since we're adding, a special tax rate for apartment units as well, and doing a better job of being more aggressive in our certifications of all types of properties through the assessor's office and efforts. I don't know if anybody has another thought on that. Am I responding to that properly?
I believe you are, Madam Chair.
Chief Mancini, do you have?
I believe the Apartment Owners Association representatives, Madam Chair. I believe when they gave testimony, in fact, I believe I see a member of that association online. I believe that they were of the opinion that this designation for smaller apartments would bring relief, and while tax rates will certainly, and rents rather, can't be rolled back, hopefully it would stabilize taxes where that it would help to keep building owners able to keep rents stable. I think that was the essence of that conversation that we heard when they appeared before this commission. And I think that might be, better said, that was the inspiration to include that as one of the recommendations. And Madam Chair, if I may say so, and it's probably best said by the chair or vice chair, but it's my understanding that this report and all of these recommendations are just that. These are recommendations that we would take and use for its express purpose. So perhaps it could determine best practices once again when we're preparing our budget. With legislative approval, we might be able to seek wider and perhaps a more stable stream of revenue from the General Assembly's legislature. So these are important recommendations. They needed to be broad enough so that they could capture later what the legislation would dictate.
Well said.
And I think the budget would determine that as well. But if you restrict these to the point where we cannot be flexible, I think it undoes the great work that this commission did.
But the important thing to follow up with you, Commissioner Mancini, is These are recommendations. We're not grinding out math. We're not coming up with percentages.
Correct.
We did the testing
That's
in
correct.
finance ad nauseam to try to make sure that this structure could return the levy that we had last year, and we met that. However, we're not budgeting. We're not in budget exercise here. Then we would, then we would know what our revenues were, we would know what our expenses are. We're not in that position. Going forward, the intention of this is, as you stated, it is a broad policy document to set the table, to set the stage for further discussions that are going to happen in finance. They're going to happen with the administration and with the council as they negotiate or discuss our budget for the year. What this does, I believe, is address our charge, which is to come up with a structure that is fair for all, is reasonable, finds additional revenues, is predictable, and addresses some of the structural challenges that we heard firsthand in our committee discussions, which was the unfairness in the apartment associations. They were bearing a significant burden that is unfair, and it impacted increase. I know Councilman Escalon was very vocal on that. It impacts rental, increases in rental, and that's a burden for all residents of the city of Providence. Also, the utilization of a percentage homestead, even though it was called a progressive tax structure, was actually regressive in that it's a percentage was given to certain people under a certain dollar amount, and anybody over that dollar amount got that percentage plus more. So the higher, the larger your property value, the more homestead exemption you qualified for. I don't think that's fair. But again, we had to work with the enabling legislation that we had in place at the time. We've never, ever gotten a budget handed to us and had the opportunity to digest it and go to the General Assembly and ask for a leave. This document is intended to provide us with all of the running room that we need to allow the administration and the council through the budget process to come up. This sets the table for us to come up with a fair and reasonable tax budget. And that's pretty much what we're trying to accomplish here. So let me continue, because there's some really good things, and I know that many people, I know this was a Councilwoman Angela, return vacant and underutilized properties to productive use. The city has many valuable vacant properties that need to be returned to productive use. The commission recommends an immediate comprehensive analysis to be performed on all vacant properties in the city. A reliable inventory be created and readily available for widespread distribution to potential buyers, developers, and purchasers. Furthermore, it is sound policy to develop a meaningful tax surcharge on vacant and underutilized property to incentivize development and raise revenues. I know Councilwoman Antoine spoke on this topic, as well as Councilor Driver. And I know that the administration is focused on that as well. So I think that's an important point, and I think that will help broaden our tax base, which we surely need. And also it will provide properties that we surely need to address our housing crisis as well. Increased tax designation, classification, certification efforts. The commission recognizes that strong internal controls are necessary to evaluate qualifications and continued eligibility for owner reduced rate occupancy tax classifications and prospective new policy classification, and recommends the administration take steps to aggressively monitor such classifications which, with appropriate up-to-date policies and procedures. The city should establish a process through which interested parties can provide information about properties that aren't appropriately designated. We spoke about that, and I think that's fair, and I think that is at the root of a lot of our issues. Working closely with the tax assessor and our auditor, we found a lot of properties that weren't classified properly. And in doing so, creating this broader classification structure, and then having a certification process will help. Commissioner Sagoras, you have the honor.
I was going to suggest that, for purposes of residency, the state actually has, has your tax bill, has your income tax address. And it seems to me that the information that they have that is audited, would be a useful beginning for that.
That's a great idea. I'm sure there's others. Again, we're not setting the
We're not going
procedures.
to record these ideas.
I think that I would leave that up to the assessor and the administration and the council to come up with the methods and mechanisms that they would need to employ, but, that's certainly a good one. Okay, what else? Continue efforts to monetize the port. Monetizing the port has been an important topic of conversation. It is the commissioner's understanding that the administration is currently working on a plan to do so. The port is a vital and valuable piece of property for the city. We look to the administration for continued vigilant efforts to expand commercial activities located on parcels adjacent to the port. Commissioner Mancini spoke about what work was being done, and that has the potential for broadening our base and increasing our tax.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Please, I'd like you to read this.
Just in summary, when we spoke of this, I believe 3 weeks ago, today, I can proudly report that the final piece of the most recent modernization efforts was completed and funded just last week. $7 million net proceeds from a PRA Proudport bond. The $7 million has a wholly dedicated purpose. It can only be used for acquisition and remediation of environmentally distressed properties in the M1, M2, Ward 9, and Ward 10 areas of the port. Councilman Espinal has been a tremendous supporter of this over the enduring process of at least the past 2 years. But in those past 2 years, it wasn't just a
This
bond.
I know.
It wasn't just a bond issue. This is an important consideration. It was the renegotiation of the terms and conditions of a lease that was extended for 30 years to help support the tenants that are there now and attract new tenants. It also increased the revenue sharing agreement, where the city was previously getting only 100,000 minimum. Today it's 500,000. It created 2 new public benefit funds, a community fund and a public benefit fund, each of which get 1% of their revenues, minimum 120,000 each. Again, Councilman Espinal was instrumental in seeing that those funds were properly created, and a whole host of other changes associated with the Providence PRA portion of that. There are other opportunities, yes, whether the word is monetized, there are other opportunities that, as they permit, we will seek those economic opportunities in development. Bear in mind that Proudport has now entered into a joint partnership with one of the largest marine operators in the United States, which makes Providence a very attractive port in place of Boston and New York. And I think you're going to see a lot of economic development. There'll be a jobs training and development program associated with offshore wind. There's a whole host of activities that have come only in the last 3 months. So administration, PRA, and Proudport and partners are proud to say that the monetization, if you use that word, has been actually completed with all of the attendant agreements.
Awesome. And I know Councilman Espinal, you've worked so hard on that topic, and the results are really remarkable.
Thank you so much. If I may, I just want to
I'd
add.
like you to add.
Thank you. Just want to add that would not be possible without the administration and goodwill, and as well as the council, a good expert of the PRA. So I'm just grateful to all.
Thank you.
Councilman.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask 2 quick questions?
Sure.
One is, so is this bullet then just about Proudport, or is it about the port overall? Because Proudport
It's
is
about
just a
the
piece.
port overall.
Okay.
It's the port overall, but the primary and most significant portion would be the commercial arrangement between the city, PRA, and Proudport.
And Proudport. And is what you were just describing, Chief Nancy, is that related to, that seems like it's related to what was being negotiated in December through like February, March of last year.
That is
Not
correct.
work
It is
contract. Okay, so this is
directly-
the implementation of
Coming in.
that.
It is directly related to both the outgoing council of 2022 and the incoming council of 2023. It is in fact specifically
All
related
those
to
little details. Just like
But this
that.
month, that can be done,
Yeah.
obviously. It's a very valuable piece of real estate. Commissioner Sabars.
I think the news about the port is wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. I really don't understand what it's doing here. Like, we didn't hear testimony about it.
Yes,
We did, we heard some comments that it was coming, but I never saw a presentation about it or a report about it or an analysis of the figures that made it seem like a good idea. Listen, I think it's a lovely thing. I'm very glad that it's happening, but I don't understand why you're asking me to endorse a document that has this paragraph in it when I don't know anything about it.
I'm sorry that you feel that way, but it's a big, this is a taxation and revenue commission,
Sure,
and that's a big piece of revenue to the city, a bigger.
but when was it on the agenda?
We spoke about it, and Commissioner Mancini testified to it. Commissioner Mancini, do you want?
I was only going to add, Madam Chair, while it wasn't designated as a presentation in of itself, it has been in the public scope for the past 24 months. It has, the agreements had one before the PRA. They required PRA approval, they required council approval. This was meant to formalize the notion that this commission, I believe, embraced the notion that this was a good source of revenue. If there were any continuing aspects of it that needed to be continued, bear in mind that that conversation that I had was nearly 6 weeks ago, that we would continue that process. And I do think that it's fair, and I think it's prudent to include.
And it's important because, as we spoke about earlier, in addition to coming up with a taxing structure, a scheme, in order for it to work, we need revenue. And then here it is. This is a revenue piece that needs to be contemplated in the whole. I know I'm going to point to our solicitor who has been whispering in my ear, monetize the book, monetize the book, monetize the book. We need that revenue. That's a big piece of revenue. Don't forget it. So, it was discussed. I'm very excited, quite frankly. This is a lot of hard work from the council finance committee and the administration, and you, Councilman Espinal, have been singing from the highest mountain on that topic. And it is a really important component of revenue for our city and will help us in our overall tax and revenue structure. That's why it's in the report. Fee and fine oversight. The commission requests that in anticipation of budget deliberations, the department directors prepare a report to the council by Q3, that was recommended by our auditor, of each calendar year of all city fees and fines, including a comparison to other similar sized cities on an annual basis. So I guess we talked about fees and fines, and they, even trying to get the council policy office to help me with fees and fines, and, we need to be more particular about what fees we're charging, what fines we're waiving, what we're not waiving, and really it adds up, and it's the little things that add up. And just asking our departments, while I was working with the assessor and the auditor, we spoke to the departments and asked for numbers to try to figure out, the math on it. But again, it's not this committee's charge to figure out the math, but I'm suggesting that we spoke enough about making sure there's internal controls in place, go forward in the process so that it's discussed in finance during the finance committee deliberations on budget. You have a thought?
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about this one. Could we also potentially include fines and fees, including like what the collection rates are? Because I remember finance this year, there's a big discussion about how low our collection rates were, which is those fines and fees.
Absolutely.
Fees, fee, fines, and collection rates, oversight? Thank you. a good edit, thank you. Counselor, Cardwell. Excuse me, Commissioner.
Commissioner, I
I
get
keep
it.
making people council people, I think
I'm
we all
not,
do.
I'm not running, if I'm running for anything, it's a
She's
way.
running the other way.
I'm just wondering, part of that conversation about fees, there was also some discussion about the capacity to research and enforce. And I'm just wondering if we need to add anything about that, because if we're just saying, look at it without really having the teeth to enforce it, whether it's teeth because we don't have enough people, or teeth because we don't collect good information. I'm just wondering if we need to sharpen that up a little bit.
Okay, I like that, like where you're going. So my legals here, either, Solicitor Freeze or, Commissioner Stoltzman, do you want to take, can you add an edit in there that addresses, Commissioner Wells' thought that she'd like to have some kind of, language that addresses oversight, or how do we edit it?
Enforcement is definitely. Research on enforcement mechanisms, but I would love a collection attorney, in the law department, responsible for debt collection, so that would pay for itself.
So let's have some language. Legal eagles.
Madam
I'm
Chair,
getting tired.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes, please. Chief Financial Officer, you must have some
I
pearls
do.
of wisdom on this.
I do, because we regularly exercise collection at the taxation level, no doubt. Reports are filed
True.
every
Yep.
10 to 14 days with finance. We certainly could do similarly and do more of that at the departmental level where there are fees associated with licensing or DIS, et cetera, et cetera. That's not to suggest that that's not done, but we could do more of that, because that's where enforcement really takes place.
So it's expand.
I would say fees and fines and collection and expand enforcement activity. And
And
that,
personnel.
Madam Solicitor?
Madam
Enforcement, activity and personnel.
And personnel. Because there's a myriad of fees that, that are not collected naturally. They require some push.
So the header is fees, fines, and collection rate oversight and enforcement activity and personnel.
Yes.
Ooh, okay. All right, you got it.
Thank you.
Plan for, and thank you, and you've been talking about that, Commissioner Wells, and that, it's, you know, it adds up, those things, you know, when we were looking at fees and fines, and, you know, those are important things, and I know, Councilwoman Andujar has the same feeling on that topic. Okay, plan for a reduction in commercial tax rate to improve Providence's competitiveness and attract new commercial business. Here we go. The commission recognizes that the city's high commercial tax rate is a significant barrier to entry and detrimental to our economic development. For the city to reduce its dependency on tax stabilization agreements and to encourage developers, the commission recommends the city initiate a plan to reduce the commercial tax rate to a more competitive and less punishing rate over a 5-year period. Thoughts? Commissioner Severis.
I write a lot about tax policy, and one of the things that I learned years ago is I learned to disregard people who call for cuts without saying where the compensation was to come from. And this appears to me to be exactly that. I mean, just calling for a cut is easy. Doing the work of figuring out where the shifting is, that's the hard part. And to be honest, I thought that those discussions were the things that we were supposed to be doing. And I welcome that conversation.
We have the highest commercial tax rate in the state. everybody, I've heard testimony for, 8 years that it's too high, that we need to modify it. I've looked at math models, and the reality is, if our commercial tax rate keeps getting pushed up to the high end to provide the levy that we need, we've backed into our tax structure over the years. It's got to stop. And this model that we're proposing here essentially does that, and that's the differential or the offset. Commissioner Mancini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not in direct response to Commissioner Severos, but this is true of any recommendation to alter or change current tax policy. In the finance department, we begin with the notion of revenue neutral, because the budget has to be revenue neutral. When and if we identify an ease or a shift of burden, we would expect that within taxation alone, it may just be shifting taxes. But if it's possible to expand the levy, generate new revenue, and that revenue assist with the plan to reduce a particular classification rate, particularly commercial, I do agree with you. Or because we've identified other new revenue sources, whether it be state pass-through dollars, departmental fees. We always begin with the premise on a budget that we have to start at revenue neutral. Then we can determine in that budget year, based on recommendations put forth, and as you pointed out, not 6 weeks into the budget season, when we're before the finance committee, but while we're building that budget, hearing from legislative leaders, including council leaders, we would always look to like, okay, we can do this, and here's the impact. And as long as we can make up that revenue change, that impact elsewhere, hopefully not a shift within the taxes, but maybe identify new revenue, we would always endeavor to do that. I think this recommendation basically says, if you haven't already, then I think we need to begin thinking that. I have said forever, Madam Chair, if you might.
I know you have.
Permit me this. It's amazing that we've held the commercial rate steady, fixed for nearly 10 years, but that's not good enough. It's only that was a pledge to the business community that we would freeze the commercial rate. And that's happened over a decade, but we have not improved upon it. We have not lowered it, not at all, not one bit. And that's an incentive for us as a city to attract new industry and new business by showing that our rates are competitive, and we're gonna have to figure that out. So this recommendation gives that guidance.
Okay. And then the last one is request changes to state pilot tax structure, advocate for enabling legislation to increase pilot payments to the city, capital city to 30%. Under state law, the state is required to reimburse municipalities with qualifying tax exempt properties in the amount of 27% of the foregone revenue. The state met that commitment in FY 2024. Not that it's always met it, correct, Commissioner Mancini?
Not always.
27% target was established decades ago for an estimate of cost of services used by tax exempt institutions in municipalities. The commission requests that the target be increased to 30%. I'm pretty adamant about that. And this was a request by the council president as well. And it's in the league's legislative request this year, so we'll get some help on that. And hopefully that will bring us on some, what's that worth to us? Commissioner Mancini, can you help us understand that a little bit?
Roughly, easily, it's about 4 million would be the difference. But Madam Chair, we might want to just refine the language.
Okay.
Where it reads, with qualifying tax and properties in the amount of 27%. Technically, it's a range. The range runs from 22% to 27%. And we've been fortunate, and I say that well-intentioned, we've been fortunate that for the past several budget years at the General Assembly level, they have remained at the 27% reimbursement rate. It could, if it had to, it could drop to 22%, and it did in the mid-90s. So I don't want to make that.
Is that legally correct? Is there a range?
The range is between 22 and 27%. So we may have to modify the range, that the range could be no lower than 24, as high as 30. That may be how that might be how the legislation could be presented for enactment, and I would defer to those who regularly appear before the General Assembly, but that might be the case.
Okay, I like 30%. especially since,
I do too.
Yeah.
ask for it.
I do too.
I think we should ask for it. We get, I think Vice Chair DeVries maybe can shed some light on this. We get like 80% of it anyway, of that pot of funds. Is that true? Can you help us on this topic?
I think the law says 27%, but it hasn't been fully funded from time to time. So, and Providence gets the lion's share. I think it gets about 80% of the money of the state.
It is definitely a range. It should,
Thank you, Vice Chair.
perhaps you could read on second sentence, under state law, the state is required to reimburse municipality for qualifying tax exempt properties in the range of 22% to 27% for the foregone revenue. That would at least cover the legal condition associated with legislation. And then if we can raise the upper level of it, by all means.
Okay, so Councilman Espinola, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So can we legally say, from 27 to 30%? Make it no less than 27%, which is the max I would before. It's the same.
Yeah, I would defer to the solicitor and those folks like Mr.
It's not
Napolitano,
fair,
who,
but it's 27%, but we never get 27%.
well, not that we don't get to 27%, there is a funding mechanism that, depending upon what the state appropriates for all communities, and then depending upon what's accepted by every community's submission, and we don't know that any year our submissions have been rejected based on values of nonprofits, that then sets in motion the formula, ideally at the top of the range, 27%, multiplied by our values, arrives at this number that we receive in reimbursement. Lately, that number's been between 34 and 36 million. There's evidence that suggests it could have been as high as 37 if the formula was calculated with more precision. But I've had that discussion with some officials at the state level, and we'll look into that a little deeper. But what I'm saying is the legislation does permit, if the General Assembly, if the state was going through some difficult times and they had to lower that reimbursement rate from 27, they could lower it to 22% as a bottom limit. I'm just simply saying that if we're going to cite the law, we should put that it's a range currently at 22 to 27. And I would love very much.
If I could just,
Vice Chair.
yeah, I think the statute actually says 27%. It's been at 27%, I think, since the late 90s. So it does get funded at different levels. So I don't know how you want to write it, but that's my understanding of the statute itself.
That was mine as well. Let's ask our solicitor.
No, my understanding is the statute reads 27% as well, so I don't know where you're getting the range from. Maybe it's in regs or something, not in state statute, so I would be comfortable suggesting it's at 30, and then if there's some kind of a, regulation that allows for somehow a lesser percentage of funding, so be it.
So can we go back? So can we strike, Chief
Yeah,
Commissioner?
by all means.
Chief Commissioner? Mancini's edit? So we're going back.
So
to
then
20.
leave it as presented.
Leave it as presented.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So that concludes the recommendations that I have here. Commissioner Sigoris.
I believe that I presented on November 8th, and, I don't know, an acknowledgement of that in the minutes might be, that it is, I mean,
We have you here. We have your presentation.
Sure.
Yeah, those are all hot links to the presentations in the appendix.
Which one is this?
Which one is mine?
The last page.
Yeah, which one?
It should be in there. Okay. What date did you present?
November 8th.
Okay. I know the hot link goes to the minutes, but the language should reflect your name as well, and I apologize. I didn't do this. The policy office put this together for me. I'm sorry. You should be in there, sir. And that was a great presentation. Okay, we'll add, Councilor Boris's presentation. but the minutes, your presentation is there. Okay, so, we now have a document with some edits that we took as we went along. The clerk has informed me that I would like to accept this edited document as Exhibit V, right? Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Who runs the whole commission, really? Okay, so, may I have a motion to accept this document as edited by the body at the table as Exhibit V? Motion made by, we're in the middle of the motion. Motion made by Councilman Espinal, seconded by Councilwoman, Angelou. Yes, sir.
Is this our final vote about?
I'm accepting this document into the record. Its motion has been made and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. This is now an exhibit to this body work. Okay, so are there any other edits and amendments that need to be contemplated, or do we feel comfortable with this document as is?
That's a question.
Yes.
Less a specific edit and more, what comes next, like if we do vote to accept this, what is the next?
Next, it goes to the council, and it is received by the council for further work to be done by the finance committee.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
it seems to me it would be appropriate for us to move and then vote on accepting this report and recommending it to the council, in addition to adding it as an exhibit. And with that notion in mind, I'm sensitive to a undertone of frustration by Commissioner Seguros, because he worked for many years and is an acknowledged scholar and published author on tax policy and other academic research. And I suffer perhaps from that same predisposition of having been involved with many detailed studies that are extended over a period of time sufficient to deeply analyze and as fully as possible analyze all the issues before either the commission, the board, the body, or within the assignment of the research task, having been so assigned. Unfortunately, that's not the environment we're in with this. The council has asked us to just take a, if you will, the colloquial 30,000-foot elevation look at tax structure and policy. And we had initially discussed being as ambitious as we could be within the 120-day deadline. So, for example, the discussion on the port revenues. While we didn't have a separate and complete study on port revenues, we did back in September ask the auditor to provide us with all of the payment in lieu of tax revenue structures. And in Exhibit G at page 3, there was a breakdown of the revenues, including the port revenues, which was woefully the smallest of the alternative revenue sources within the payment in lieu of tax structures. And then it was in that context that we discussed, is there an opportunity to increase that? So, and while normally in a tax revenue expenditure standpoint, one wouldn't want to cut a tax or even recommend considering cutting a tax, like we're doing, like I hope we'll do, recommend just to get to a competitive commercial tax rate. We did hear testimony, extensive testimony, I thought, compared to some of the other testimony that we heard, including Mr. Sweeney's testimony, that having a rate that is 30% higher than the average rate could reduce the value on a $10 million property by a full $1 million. So a 10% reduction in the value using a conservative 10% capitalization rate. So while this is not a complete analysis of revenue, a complete analysis of expenditures, I'm satisfied that the chair has done a wonderful job of gathering enough information and helping us gather enough information that we can make these 10, coincidentally, there are 10, it's a nice even number for me to manage, 10 recommendations that
the council can take and say, okay, from a policy standpoint, somebody at least took a look at these and said, we should go in this direction. Separating the classification rates, trying to make the rates competitive, examining our alternative fee structures. I don't need to repeat all 10 of them, but the policy is to try to reallocate, restructure, and collect. And it might even need a collections attorney in the solicitor's office to do so. A job I would never want for myself. So with all that being said, as background, and while Voltaire will have to forgive me, I don't like making the perfect the enemy of the good. I think this is very, very good work for the short period of time we had to do it. And with that, I move that we accept these recommendations as a package for delivery to the council.
Thank you. Second,
I second.
all in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed?
Yes.
Ayes have it. Motion carries, the matter is approved, this document is approved. Yes, you can make.
You know, I'm sitting here and I'm sensing the same frustration, and I'm hearing the comments and the questions. And all along, I've had to, in my head, say, okay, we can't go but so deep because of the time. Every time I got frustrated on my way home about what we didn't say or what we didn't ask, I brought myself back to a reality of a time constraint. So while I'm completely in agreement with you about how deep we didn't go, I really do hear what Rob is, what Commissioner Stolzman is saying about within the time frame. I'm comfortable for that reason and being and willing to second the motion because of that and vote in favor.
Thank you.
May I,
Okay.
may I speak or are we adjourned?
I was going to adjourn, but we value your participation on this body. I think that you just heard your colleagues speak to that. This has been a big, big task, and of course you can speak.
It has been a big, big task, and I understand that the time is short, but I also understand that I was actually prevented from going as deeply as I had the time and inclination to do. I was really quite astonished that I was actually prevented from getting some data that I had requested. I made requests of questions for the person from Vision Appraisal. Those never happened. There were a bunch of things that that made it difficult to even do the work that we did do. About the specific recommendations, there's a couple in here that I actually disagree with, that I mentioned. I don't think on balance this is actually going to have a positive effect on the burden on tenants. There may have been some analyses to persuade you that the classification changes would come out okay, but those tests that you made were not actually presented here. So how would I know? Yes, it is true that we have had occasional mentions of the port and the port revenue, but that is not the same as actually having a presentation about it where we had a chance to dive into the numbers and actually ask questions.
Okay, okay, I think we've heard enough. I thank you very much. I'd like at this juncture to ask for a motion to adjourn the matter that we were here in full for on the agenda in the open meetings was voted upon on the other motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilman Espinal, seconded by Commissioner Stolzman, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries, we are adjourned. Once again, thank you all for your hard work. Appreciate your time, effort, and energy. I have the edited document.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, the packages are yours. The packages are yours.
The plaques are also.
All right, found the language.
Thank you.
Oh, the plaques are yours.
Wow.